Welcome. My name is Rashard Butts. I am the Senior Program Manager of the HBCU program at the Human Rights Campaign. Welcome to our Power Leadership and Learning series. This is our very first conversation, which we are bringing to you from the HBCU program. And this is our ways to have further conversations and dialogue around interesting but also very important topics that relates to both the HBCU community, but also the Black and Black LGBTQ community. I am joined today by Dr. Brent Lewis, Trinice McNally, and Dr. Gerald States. I'll allow them each to introduce themselves and we'll open up for a great conversation.
Thank you, Rashard, for inviting me to this panel to speak. My name is Dr. Brent Lewis. I serve as the Associate Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at James Madison University. My space in this conversation is that I previously served as the Director for Cultural Programs and the LGBTQ Resource Center at Fayetteville State University. We were the third HBCU in the country to open a center, which is also called the Safe Zone Office, and I use he, him pronouns.
Hey folks, my name is Trinice McNally. I use she, her pronouns. Super excited to be here. I'm the founding director for the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Multicultural Affairs at the University of the District of Columbia, one of our nation's oldest HBCUs. We opened up in 2018, and I guess my entryway into this conversation is that I started this work as a student organizer, doing radical Black queer organizing at HBCU campuses. Ran an LGBT center at North Carolina Central, which is the second HBCU in the country to have a center. I've worked on a number of HBCUs around the country, including my alma mater, Bethune-Cookman University, Stetson University, Howard, Florida A&M, and the list goes on. So really excited to be here and to be in conversation, to share best practices, and to be in conversation with some of my favorite colleagues in this work.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gerald Spates. I'm the director in the Office of Intercultural Engagement here at North Carolina A&T State University in the great state of North Carolina and Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. My pronouns are he, him, his, and actually I'm excited to be a part of this conversation as a result of my previous experience, which really extends over 20 plus years from beginning my work at Penn State University, doing diversity and inclusion work, Tulane University, UNC Charlotte, and as well as here in North Carolina A&T State University, as well as Western Kentucky University. I attended the University of Florida, University of South Carolina, Azusa Pacific University. Also done some additional graduate work at here at North Carolina A&T and Western Kentucky University. So I'm really excited.
Thank you all. We're glad to have y'all. So y'all are actually some of my favorite colleagues in the movement and have done some groundbreaking, trailblazing work on your respective campuses. So I'm really excited to have your voice in this. So thank you again. So we'll just go ahead and hop right in. Can you please tell us, in no particular order, but if I had to pick, I'll just start with, who was first? So Dr. Brent, you were Fayetteville, that was third. Trinice, we'll start with you from your work at NCCU, and then kind of go also into your work now at the UDC as the founding director. Could you please tell us, how long your center has been active, both at UDC, you can speak to NCCU as well if you like, and what opportunities, services, resources do you all provide in the center, in the space?
All right, we're back. Sorry, internet. So it feels like every time someone asks me that question, it feels like I've been doing this at UDC for a decade. And it's like I wasn't even at UDC for a decade. It feels like I've been there so long. The center was founded officially in 2018 when I was hired to basically open and create a center for historically marginalized folks. We didn't actually have our grand opening until 2019. So I actually spent a year of doing research, really a lot of organizing, learning about the landscape of UDC, learning about what kind of students we serve, what was done in the past, what wasn't done in the past, what had been the history of LGBTQ student experiences there specifically. So I think what makes my center in particular unique out of all HBCUs is that we kind of serve as a social justice hub on our campus. So the work of our center focuses on the needs of LGBTQ and gender expansive students, folks who are international students. So that is including folks with status and without status. So we're talking folks on F1, we're talking folks on TPS, DACA, or may have no documentation at all, and also first generation college students, which kind of include a litany of different types of folks. When we think about folks on the margins, right? So those are survivors, those are folks who are formerly incarcerated, and those are also, folks who are non-traditional. So I think it makes our work and my approach of the work a little different working at UDC in comparison to NCCU, right? Which was one of the second LGBTQ center at an HBCU, and has like this really interesting connection and focus specifically for LGBTQ people. I think the work that I've done over the last decade, I would say, has evolved as I have evolved, right? In my politics as a Black feminist, and as I'm really clear about what it means to serve historically marginalized folks and how do we keep them on the margins, that is how we do our work. So we provide resources in terms of whether it's food, right? Whether it's directories and access to what's happening in the city, down to political education. It is one of the safest places on campus, I would say, but I also don't truly believe in safe spaces because there's no way that we can control, right, how people act and how people engage. So if anything, it's a space of bravery where people can come and be themselves. We also offer a lot of trainings. There's about 10 to 12 different trainings I do on campus, like in rotation for student leaders, for faculty, for just community members. There is also a study abroad program that I founded, the short-term study abroad, where so far we've been to Italy. I just came back from Ghana in 2019 for the year of return. And what I've done in terms of building out that program is ensuring that historically marginalized students were centered. So I was in particular looking at LGBTQ folks, right, who had never been out of the country, folks who may be on F1, who are working class, who would have never had the access, right, to be able to leave and to come back in. So I think my holistic approach comes from my Black feminist politics and the ways that I understand historically marginalized communities. And I think that is what kind of separates our work from how other people may be approaching the work. But I think about the whole student, right? Because people are not just coming here as queer. I am a Black queer feminist migrant survivor, and the list goes on, right? We don't get to show up as one thing, as our Drew Lord teaches us. So I like to have that approach of like, yes, you're queer and you're so many other things, right? Like you're working class, you may be non-traditional, you may be this, you may be that, but those identities, right, are not the things that help us build power. It's the ways that we understand systems, right, that give us the access to the power to make the changes we need. So I think that that would be like my entryway, that initially, if you looked at my work trajectory from within Cookman on down, it was kind of evolving as a student organizer from a very like gender and sexual orientation framing. And I think as I've grown as an organizer politically, my work has also evolved in that way as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Dr. Lewis, we can hop to you.
Sure. So I'll start with, I actually started this work as a grad student at North Carolina A&T, my alma mater. And Gerald and I had done some things together along with other colleagues at A&T. But when I went to Fayetteville State, I was actually hired to be the director for cultural programs, which had nothing to do with LGBTQ. The center was actually created in 2013 by a faculty member, Dr. Emily Lennon. I always give her credit because she started the work on our campus. She came to FSU as a criminal justice faculty member and was more familiar with PWIs. And so she didn't understand why there wasn't a queer center or a multicultural center or LGBTQ resource space. So she worked with the vice chancellor to start doing some safe zone trainings for campus. Our vice chancellor asked for a report after the safe zone training was done. And the report, she said, give me recommendations for our university based on you doing these trainings. Well, Emily's number one recommendation was that we needed a space, we needed a center on campus that was staffed and engaged the entire community. So I really was the first person to come into that role over multicultural programs and running day-to-day LGBTQ resources. The center was actually housed in a residence hall when it started because our student center was under construction. When they reopened our student center, there wasn't a dedicated space for the Safe Zone office. So I met with the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and the Director for Career Services because Career Services had two separate spaces. long story short, I was given one of those spaces to create. So I recreated the office. I didn't start the office, but I reopened it 2 years later because it had closed. There was no one running it. The residence hall had went back to being a residence hall. So I bought new furniture. The VC gave me a budget to buy furniture, to buy paintings, to buy artwork to put in the space that was affirming to students and their identities. And we kicked it off in 2015. We reopened the center in September of 2015. And to the campus, I think they were familiar with it because it existed before me, but not in the same sense as I'd done the work. One, I could identify with the work. Dr. Lennon could as well, but she was faculty. I was also a Black queer person. So that attached very well to the students who needed me. In terms of services, I provided trainings to campus that they were not as familiar with getting them as regularly as I did. They were most familiar with Safe Zone training, but I found that we needed to explore more than Safe Zone. We needed to explore trans identities because our trans population was growing at FSU, and no one really knew how to engage trans students. Engaging with pronouns, talking about classroom experiences was not happening prior to me arriving. So there were a lot of conversations that I think I ignited that we weren't having before. My office was student facing, so programming, engagement opportunities for students. I like Trini's language of brave spaces. I think I created those brave spaces in the office for students to come in, dialogue, support each other peer to peer, lean on me for guidance and support. But also faculty and staff utilize my space a lot just to ask questions, to make sense of things, to ask about best practice when engaging with their students. That's what I appreciated the most about the spaces, and it became a hub for anyone who was willing to learn and grow.
Thank you for that.
All right, good stuff. Good afternoon. I'm again Gerald Spates. You know, it's really interesting for me. All of my experience prior to North Carolina A&T has really been at PWIs, and so I've had, you know, in all those instances where I've done a lot of different things, but I've done a lot of work around diversity and inclusion related initiatives, in addition to even teaching for 11, 12 years at various institutions where I've taught diversity and cultural relevant related coursework, and had really the great opportunity to help with establishing different centers. You know, here at North Carolina A&T, as the director in the Office of Intercultural Engagement, of course, that's a new name for us. We just adopted that new name as of July 1. We were the Multicultural Student Center here at North Carolina A&T. For years, we've actually been on this campus for really well over 30 plus years, which is a lot of people were not even aware of that history. And even as I dug into some of the research of my office or unit, you know, when I learned that, I'm like, wow, you know, it was just really amazing to me. And I was really taken back, well, not taken back, I'll say really, really excited or ignited with the fact that being for the first time at a historically Black institution, and when I saw the advocacy and the outcry and the, you know, and this, you know, and what the interest of students, what it was, you know, and being a person that I am, because I'm very student-centered in my approach, I'm very broad in what I do. And in our LGBT Resource Center here at North Carolina A&T has been in existence since 2019. We opened up in February 2019. And so we're very fresh and brand new. However, the conversation is not brand new. We actually begun that process. And when I mention being student-centered, I don't do things or initiate things because I want it. I do it because students want it. And and honestly, when I came to North Carolina A&T, I thought it would be really exciting to see what diversity program and education looked like at a HBCU. And so been a lot of real positive experiences, as well as some negative ones, because I can tell you, I definitely have battle scars, but battle scars even at the PWIs, I will say that. But we started initially because despite under the then Multicultural Student Center, we're doing a lot of outreach and work and support to support all communities, but especially our LGBT QIA plus student community on campus. But we learned that it wasn't enough. I happened to go to a conference several years ago, and to learn that that's a number of our student members who are part of the LGBT community had transferred out of A&T to Central, and I said, this can't happen. We can't allow this to happen again. And so back in 2000, it was like 2013, 14, I got with a group of student leaders on campus who are part of our LGBT student-led organization that I'm proud to say that I was a part of helping to establish. They were called PROUD at the time, now they're PRISM, as well as several key faculty and staff on campus. And we begun the process to craft a space, or the need for a space. Of course, that got derailed when our student center went down, because we realized that there really wasn't any space to create a space. So it kind of was for about 5.5 years. It was, nothing happened, but yet it's still a lot of programming and support and outreach still did happen. And it really wasn't until I think it was in 2018 when I had conversations again with students, because, and a lot of that, let me just take a step back. A lot of that culminated from a campus climate, a diversity campus climate assessment that I created. And it's the same campus climate assessment that, of course, modified from campus to campus, that I've used in some of my research, but also to establish, for school actually, but I used it to help establish different, like a couple of women's centers, religious and spiritual life spaces, but also the LGBT A Center. And because I wanted to gauge students' interest and see what the needs would be. So when still that outcry about the importance of having an LGBT center was still there. And so we begun the process again to reestablish. And so I pulled people in to get faculty, staff, and our student leaders. And so we actually implemented and made the process and made it happen. And I wanted it to be a space that would be very student-centered and student-driven and supported, but a space for the entire institution to embrace and utilize as a functioning space. And I won't say that it didn't come with challenges, but I think it's challenges in every regard in the initial stages of establishing something so sensitive. From a programming perspective, I mean, we pretty much covered the gambit with regard to supporting and giving recognition to the whole conversation around transgender relationship, LGBT History Month, tons and tons of the coming out process, We have a very active safe zone process that quite a few of our faculty, staff, and student leaders are, making sure that they become safe zone trained, and why that it is important to continue to embrace and support the whole conversation and about it. And so, a lot of really great things are happening. That space has been, it's been not surprising to me. However, what is surprising to me is that the number of students who identify as allies, who are so comfortable in that space. And I think that is so critical with regard to how we continue to see it grow. And even like right now, my primary mission is to make sure that our students, especially our incoming students this year, continue to see the value in the space and to utilize it, and so that we can continue to support new students who are coming to our campus. And I love the work, given the work that I do, even before the space actually opened up, is that, and when I talked about advocacy and being very student-centered, students, would flock and they would come to me to talk about their needs, because they're athletes, they're members of our Greek community, they're, student leaders on campus in so many regard, but they just needed someone to talk to. And so I just see a lot of really good promise and a lot of great things happening in the continuation of, of our space on campus.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask this question. So many of our HBCUs have been in existence for over 150 years now. And we are having a conversation now about LGBTQ centers, but we know that a lot of HBCUs still don't even have LGBTQ student organizations, right? So I do want to ask for your thoughts around, why do we think it's taken this long, or like, what are some of the historical barriers and modern contemporary barriers that we still face on the institutions in regards to creating space like this, like student centers for LGBTQ students and their allies?
I can jump in first on that question. One of the challenges, and not just in HBCU spaces, is that it's hard to capture data of who queer students are. You can capture how many Black students you have. Mm-hmm. You can capture students with disabilities. Right. You can capture veterans. It is very hard to capture who queer students are. And in a world where people are so focused on assessment, they want to know, if we're putting money towards this, how many students will this really impact? How will this really manage the experience on our campuses? I think the other part with HBCUs is religion. HBCUs are birthed out of the church, and both public and private function very Black church-ish, right? So the religion piece and not wanting to upset alum and donors, I think, has hindered us in our decision making to move forward with creating centers. Sometimes people are assumed that parents will have challenge with universities having these spaces. Those are some of the barriers that I've seen us face, but also I think it's generational. A lot of our presidents are older. Many of them are from baby boomer generation, and don't engage in these conversations very much. And so that impacts moving us forward when you have leaders who aren't willing to engage, because the people on the ground can't make the decisions alone. You've got to have the support. You've got to have the funding. You've got to have the backing. And that's one thing I appreciated about Fayetteville State when I was there. My chancellor was very supportive. He went to HRC's meetings with chancellors and vice presidents. We come back and have conversation about what he learned there and what that meant for our campus. So I think leadership plays a huge role in the ability to move those initiatives forward on an HBCU campus. And really leaders who are forward thinking and willing to listen to students and learn about what they're saying they want to see and what they need for their experience at the institution. The last thing I'll say, diversity work in Black spaces is difficult. And it doesn't always happen in our spaces because there's this assumption that we're all Black, everyone's Black at the institution. You don't need to have conversations around race, and race is the top tier of the diversity conversation. And we ignore students with disabilities, international students, queer students, you name the other parts of the margin. And that is the challenge because students don't function siloed with their identities. They're intersecting all the time. So I think that's some of the challenges with why there's only 6 HBCUs with queer services and there's others who are still not addressing the concern.
Yeah. If I can say also, I can echo I'm not going to repeat everything my good friend Dr. Lewis has said because it's also true. And I can think about when just in some of my teaching, I've taught courses, diversity-related courses, but they were all at PWIs especially. But in my work here, when I provide a lot of outreach and within our classroom spaces, the conversation centers around the intersectionality of not only maybe gender or sexual orientation, but just differences so that we can bring a broader brush and broader understanding about especially as it relates to the whole LGBT community, what all that means and why it's important. And I said, and I had to really be at the forefront of, I think, shocking people in that, it's just not here. This conversation or this community isn't just now coming to campus. They've always been here. It's just not been as visible, or they were ignored, especially at PWI, not PWIs, but HBCUs. And so, I feel very fortunate that that here at North Carolina A&T, I feel that our chancellor or a lot of our leadership is supportive in some regard, especially if there are things that's needed to support students' interest, and I've certainly have seen quite a bit of that. But we have to not be afraid to be at the forefront because I think it just permeates, I think, all communities on campus, and you don't know who is a part of the community. But I've just even have taken so much pleasure in my work and being able to work with my student advocates and allies as it relates to the LGBT perspective, because they've helped push the agenda and to help make things happen the way we want it to see on campus.
Yeah, I think that you all have mentioned a lot of things that I would agree with. So I don't think there's any need to repeat those things. But I think that there are probably 4 critical things that have impacted our ability at HBCUs to move not just towards inclusion, but to liberation, right? And when we think about the founding of our institutions, someone talked about, right, the Black church, right? So in the United States of America, the oldest standing institutions are what? The Black church and historically Black colleges and universities. And within that is elitism and respectability politics, right? And it is because that is at the root of how our institutions was founded. I would argue that is also why less than 30% of HBCUs have student organizations and 6 have centers, right? And those of us that are on this call, we know that, right? Because we've been doing this for a while. And I remember when it was 2. I remember when it was 3. I remember when it was 5, and now it's 6. But I think until we can actually get to the root of the issue, which is respectability politics and elitism, then our institutions are going to continue to go down this rabbit hole of using multicultural affairs as a Band-Aid. Multicultural affairs is not going to bring us towards liberation. I'm sorry to tell everybody, it's really a pacification of making people feel comfortable and safe. If we're actually committed to the liberation of Black people, in particular Black queer people, then we need to have a curriculum that mirrors that, right? We need to actually break up with patriarchy, right? Which means that like Black men in particular who have had these positions for years need to move out the way and allow Black women and gender expansive people to be able to run the programs. We need to actually be able to have more resource centers, right? Focused on gender and thinking about race, gender, and class, and just not LGBTQ identity, right? Because like Brent said, it's not in a silo. None of us exist that way. I think something else to offer before we move is thinking about Howard University. When you think about Lucy Diggs Slowe, right, which is the first Black woman that was a dean of higher education, and her relationship to Mordecai Johnson, the first Black president of Howard, and how she was mistreated. He literally killed her because he was so homophobic, because he hated LGBTQ people, because he hated Black women, right? That is why like she died and struggled in the way that she did, and which is why so many of us are dying on our campuses right now, right? Because if we're going to continue to only say we have a multicultural affairs program or we have an LGBTQ program, but you don't do anything, right? You have no commitment. I'm not talking about your budget. I'm talking about your self-commitment to transforming your ideas and how you think. Our institutions are going to continue to fail. I think the problem is they don't care about failing because homophobia, transphobia, and patriarchy feels good to people, right? Because it will force you to change. So I think it's at the root, right? It's the respectability politics, it's the elitism, it's the patriarchy, which people don't actually want to interrogate because they benefit from it, right? Like, so if there's violence that you benefit from, why would you want to change that? And I think that's the crossroads that we're at.
Thank you for that, y'all. So next question, can we talk a little bit about, so I want us to kind of like walk through the process to the best of your knowledge of you all's campuses, making the investment into you all center, and then what that process looked like from planning to execution. So I think the people want to know. They want to know, how did you all do it, right?
I can go first because I wasn't there, so my answer is going to be pretty short.
Okay.
I don't know how that happens. I think with Emily's recommendations, the vice chancellor just went to her central budget and gave money to make things happen. When I got there and recreated the center, that's what happened. I already had a budget actually for queer programming and for the center. And so my budget was more programmatic than anything else. So I used that budget to buy furniture, set up the space, support the student org, which was called Spectrum, and then support programming that came out of the office. That's as much as I can speak to. There were times where I had to advocate for a larger budget because I think what they asked for in 2013 or 2014 looked very different in 2018 and 2019. The students grew, the population grew, the visibility grew. We planned our first Pride Week in like 17, and that grew over the years. My last semester there, we had a ball, and we had Amaya Scott on campus, and so the programming and the needs grew. So that meant the commitment and the budget needed to grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, similar. I got to UDC and they had been in conversation about building this multicultural center. I actually was at the National Black Justice Coalition. I ran our HBCU program there for like a year and a half. And I had been kind of contracted to do cultural competency training at HBCUs on the East Coast. So that's kind of like how I met their leadership and the president's cabinet, et cetera. And they had this idea. I don't honestly think that, just like Brent, it wasn't supposed to be LGBTQ inclusive, really, right? Like, I truly don't think that was on the menu. I think it was, international students, right? Maybe some queer folks. And I really appreciate Gerald's like question to us around, like, I think this is the critical question. What is multicultural affairs at an HBCU? Mm-hmm. Because theoretically, when people have like built multicultural affairs, it like was after the evolution of like ethnic and gender studies centers, right, in the 60s and the 70s, which was a call for like unrest, right, on university campuses. Like, that's literally how our work started. And I think that multicultural affairs has become like this like comfortable name, right, that like brings like peace for some reason, or really is just super liberal, if we just want to really call it what it is, super liberal. And I think that when they hired me to do it, they had an idea, but they didn't really know what I was going to do. Like, I think that it was like, oh, we trust her, we know her work, we think, right? And then it was like, oh, it's getting kind of radical. What the hell is going on here? So like, yeah, it's really an interesting place to be. And I say that like fully transparently. Like, I graduated from an HBCU, the only one founded by a Black woman, and it was an interesting place, but Bethune-Cookman's still an interesting place. Private institution, was super homophobic, had made strides, but like, I think we got to call things what they are. And I think that like with that comes a level of like, there's no protection for us, right? If you're not on the faculty side. So like when Gerald was talking about battle scars, I was like, child, if we all could show each other, right, the things that as us as queer people, right, who have had to navigate these campuses with our own people, it has been wild. And I think the thing is that students also see it.
Yeah.
Right. I don't have to have a conversation with a student when the student can see and enter the room and understand what's happening. So in terms of like budgeting and programming, like the center is still very much forming and norming our even own budget line. Most of the things that I get, I have to beg for, right? Within the division, or my supervisor will look out, right? And be like, yo, want to make sure you have this money for this, want to make sure you have this money for that. But I pay for things out of my pocket all the time. Because that's what I have to do, or we don't have things.
Preach.
Students don't have food. Students don't have condoms. Students can't get their rent paid. And I think that like there's so much more that institutions could do. Like if we had the budgets that we deserved, I could run mutual aid right out of the center's budget. 5 of the people that I know that are homeless right now, that could look different, right? If we had the funding to support them. So I'm so curious to hear about how PWIs are sometimes doing it with these massive budgets that they have. And like, we're literally pulling it out of our purses, literally in our bank accounts to support our students.
Yeah.
Right.
I can honestly say I don't have a specific budget. My budget hasn't changed under the office, the intercultural office, intercultural engagement office. Everything that's used also for the LGBT Resource Center has to come out of that. Now, mind you, if I need additional resources, I've been very successful in being able to get funding support if I requested it. But just real quickly, I really had to, when I had to present a proposal. I presented a proposal to the administration, and with so many of the selling points, and looked and I really was benchmarking a lot of similar institutions, not just other HBCUs, but other similar type of institutions, and also I think what helped me was when I developed the climate assessment, I intentionally infused broad information, but a lot of information and questions were designed that catered to the needs to support the whole LGBT issues and concerns, and to reflect students' feelings, and perspective, and why that's important, and then being able to get them to buy into it. And just like, for example, God knows we're going through this pandemic right now, but I spent a full year without even staff in my LGBT center. So I had to come in, instead of being in my space where everything I need is here, I had to, to occupy that, because to keep it functioning. And God, on an average week, I was able to show that 80, would have 80 plus students a month in that space. It's not a huge space, but it's a great space, and students are very comfortable in that space. And I'm excited about what's happening now. But God knows the challenge is still monumental, and the support is here. And I think because when they codify a lot of things under, institutional's mission statement that talks about, diversity and inclusion, and they talk about all the different layers, gender equity, LGBT, and stuff like that. Sometimes, I question, because like I said, I'm a dinosaur at this, and I've been doing, it's like, I still, I don't have a problem with challenging the system, because it's not about me. It's about making sure that students have a reason and a purpose for being here. And that's what I continue to challenge the institution for. And so that's why, I just brought in um, someone that I'm so excited, actually a former um, ambassador who actually attended the HRC conference. I think the last time we had it face to face, Christian Moore.
Christian Moore.
And so I was able to steal him away from another institution to come back. I had someone before, but things just went crazy during the pandemic, and so, but still, even with that position, the person in that role has been it's a temp. And I'm very adamant that I don't want to see that space to still be occupied in a temp capacity. I need someone who could be in a position to give me, to be able to work freely, because a temp have their limitations. So, and I challenge in terms of what is the intentionality of why we're existing sometimes, because sometimes I'm not sure if we know why we're doing things, or as I say, the power at will. But I think the intention is there, but they don't fully understand it. And and I can just continue to advocate and express, the needs, and I challenge and continue to challenge my colleagues, and as well as students and parents, of why a space like this is so important. And it's tough work. It's very tough work.
Yeah, definitely is. So last question before we move to final remarks and wrap up. Because we heard you all mention retention, we heard student success rates, and like all of these other positive factors that institutions look to always like hold to high regard. How has the center or your space added to that? What has been the overall impact? And I know, Dr. Space, your center is fairly new, but and even Trinice 2019 is pretty recent. Well, 2018 is pretty recent. How has your center or space added to the campus? Like, what has been the benefits of this space?
Broader visibility, because, and I think what the space has done outside of the intercultural office function is that, and I remind the leadership is that, prospective students, especially, they're looking for places they can come and feel that they are part of the campus community. So that space has really been wonderful with that, with providing that. And I think a lot of our student leaders has really played a role to help me in terms of my mission to challenge the institution about what their needs are and why why the support is needed. So, because it's the only way we're going to keep students on our campus, as well as attract students to our campus. So it's been very, very visible, but I still think we have a long way to go. We still have a lot more work to do, because again, the space is still relatively new, and regardless of all the cute brochures and things on the website, more, because we have to be very intentional about what we are advocating.
I would say that I definitely saw the space impact recruitment. I remember maybe like fall 2017, we had about a large number of LGBTQ students come from the DC area. And I remember at orientation, I asked the students, like, what made you choose Fayetteville State? Like, you coming from DC, you've got Howard, you have Bowie, you have Morgan State. what made you come here? And they were like, to be honest, we wanted to go to an HBCU. We also wanted to go somewhere that would be celebrated in our queerness. And we felt like we could be safe and wear what we want to wear and be affirmed in that. And they done their due diligence. They looked online, they looked on social media, and they found that Fayetteville State had an office and had an organization. So that spoke to marketing what we do. And so I saw our recruitment of visible queer students go up as the space became more prevalent on our campus. I also saw those students stay. I saw them graduate. And I know they stayed and graduated because the center was there to support. They came to my office when they had needs. No one was talking to them about queer sex.
Right.
No one was giving them condoms. They didn't feel comfortable going to the health center because many of the women in the health center, they felt to be judgmental. Nobody was talking to them about dating apps and STDs and the safety of, living in Fayetteville in a military town where a military base exists. There was a lot of challenges there. So I think my office definitely impacted recruitment and retention. I will also say that the office impacted the experience of faculty and staff. When I got to Fayetteville State, it was a very homophobic space. It was a very transphobic space too. And I don't think they'd ever had anyone as out, proud, and loud as me work at the institution. So that in itself helped the culture at the institution. When I left, I stayed for 4 years. When I left, I remember a lot of the cis hetero men saying, I never would have engaged with someone like Brent, but Brent made me think differently. Brent made me see things from a different lens. And it's not about me, the person, but it is about having someone that's in that seat who can help the campus look at things from a different lens and really lean into our discomfort. And that is what's needed on these campuses, is that it's not just about the students, although we are there to create spaces of engagement, support, resources for them, but we also need to think about their experiences outside the classroom. Trinice talked about curricular experiences. That has to be on the table because it's a holistic approach to their engagement at the university. They're just not student affairs responsibility. They're not just in the residence halls and going to programs. They have experiences in the classroom. They have experiences in the dining hall. They have experiences at programs that have nothing to do with student affairs, athletic events. There's so many spaces that is very heteronormative, cisgender thinking that we have to address, and we can't do that without competent staff who do this work and are paid to do this work. Enough with couching these roles in other places and giving people dual responsibilities to do the work. If you're really committed, hire and pay people to do the work who have the credentials, who have the knowledge, who have the skill set to ensure a safe and affirming and brave space on your campuses.
Yeah. Making it about, making the whole conversation about LGBT is part of the normal conversation on a day-to-day basis too. So I appreciate what you're saying, Brent.
I think the last thing I would add in hindsight is to pick up kind of where Brent left off. I think institutions need to make better commitments, right? Like, you don't build an LGBT center and you hire one person and then you expect amazing things to happen in terms of increasing retention and increasing this and like this and that. Because what happens is burnout, right? Because there's one person doing 5 people's job, right? Which is oftentimes, even when you look at these 6 HBCUs that have these centers, including multicultural centers, is oftentimes one person that's underpaid and overworked. So I really appreciate your offering, Brent, because I think that sometimes we have to accept crumbs in order to really save people's lives, right? Because that's like the business of doing this work on college campuses, not just HBCUs, but like we're really working with young people and we're working with vulnerable people and non-traditional folks. So I think the approach that the center has used has created a space on campus where folks can actually be themselves and like leave their respectability at the door, right? Where there's conversations that some colleagues will refer me to have with students because they're like, we think that it will land better, right? If it comes from you. Or the students shared that they didn't feel comfortable talking to me because they don't feel safe with me. Or like students will come and share like different things that I will have to share with sometimes with my supervisor or other colleagues about how they engage with students, right? Especially when we're talking about Title IX things, right? Like majority of colleges, universities are out of compliance with Title IX, right? People think they know Title IX, and I'm like, you obviously don't know Title IX because it has been changing over the last 5 years because we had an office. But like just very small conversations to me that are really huge victories of people know where to go. People know how to talk. So many of my LGBTQ students who like I've personally seen as their advisor all have jobs and like great paying jobs or are organizers throughout the city. They've like changed dramatically in terms of like what their political values are and how they engage like with their community. And to me, it needs to be a testament of, so what changes have you made on your campus? And then what changes are you making in your community? Because really that's what the mission statements claim to do, right? At UDC, ours is graduate transformative leaders. That's goal 3 of our strategic plan. And to me, I think our center speaks to that transformation that's possible. Will you come in as a queer student? Would you come in as an international student? The co-curricular programs and the experiential learning that we do through like this Black radical feminist lens creates more opportunity for people to be real, you know, about who they are and be really willing to transform. Because I think something that's critically missing, and it's like that issue between student affairs and faculty, is that faculty folks think that we're not using theory in our framework, right? And then like student affairs folks, some of them don't. They don't want to. They're not interested. They actually haven't. They're not even skilled to do the job, right? When we talk about being student centered, so I think we just really need to. There needs to be a reckoning, and like on college campuses around like, so who is prepared to do this work, and like who is actually committed to doing this work, because it's literally people's lives that are in our hands. And I think that every person that engages with the student should be trained, right? Not one time for the cultural competency training for your whole 4 years. And now you got the ally sticker on, but you're saying homophobic and transphobic things. You're not an ally. You've been to one training, right? Like it's a commitment to transformation. And I think that it starts from the head up, from the cabinets. People have to come with this interest, right? And this willingness and this vulnerability. And I'm really excited to see how UDC is going to continue to grow. I'm really excited to see how Rashad's going to host this conversation in 3 years, and it's going to be 12 centers. You know, and maybe it's going to be 40% of HBCUs. And like maybe Brent will be the president at another school by then, right? Like I'm excited to see the progress, because I think we actually can have this conversation, but also without talking about the progress that literally is progress that we've made, right? It's like people on this call, and there are going to be many more young people that come, and hopefully people we trained up, right, will be prepared.
Right. Thank you for that. So final question, and then we're going to close out. And we're going to do this one like elevator pitch style. So 30 seconds or less, try to keep it short. And I'm going to actually give you 2 options. You can answer either one. So the first one is that we have an active audience filled with students, staff, alumni, and faculty and administrators. If you had to speak to them and give them any push or inspiration, what would that be? Or if you want to take this final moment to share any feel good or proud moments that you've had doing this work, and that would kind of like elevate why this work is important. So either one, and we will start with Dr. Lewis for this one.
I'm going to give the feedback on the second part, the feel good. You know, Trinice spoke to the fact that this work is hard and it's taxing. And I think Gerald also spoke to that. But I have a box of cards that I took with me when I left Federal State, from queer students, from straight students, from faculty, from staff, that said, thank you for your authentic self. Thank you for bringing all of you to this work and to this campus. We needed it, and we didn't know we needed it. And that, you know, Trinice talked about we take crumbs in this work because we're saving lives. I knew that when I stepped into it. And that affirmed for me that even though it was challenging, even though I wasn't paid for my worth, even though I had a PhD and I was making not PhD money, it was where I needed to be. It was my passion, it was my calling, and this work is important. It's important to students, and it's important to our colleagues. So that's my feel good. It's not always about the politics and the issues that we face, but I know my work is meaningful.
Thank you. Dr. Spates?
You know, Brent really hit everything on the head, but with regard to feel good, I tell when students walk into my office and and ask, hey, can I close the door and just have a conversation? I don't know what they're going to talk to me about. And I get nervous because, and to be able to support them and embrace them, and I'm referring to not just, well, both men and women, but especially the young men, because when we think about all this machismo, because I'm talking about young men who are, I mean, they're athletes, they fit all the macho, and they're breaking down because of experiences and the fact of having someone that they feel that they could trust. It does not only, it doesn't necessarily, it makes me feel good in that I can support and serve in that capacity, because that's so critical, because I'm in it for them. We have to be in it for them, and we have to stop faking the funk and pretending, and stop just putting a Band-Aid on things, and we have to be very intentional when we create these spaces and provide the resources and the services. Because actually I took both those questions and kind of like codified them together, because we have to, we're here for the students, for those, in the now, we're here for them, and we have to continue to support them.
Thank you. And Ms. McNally.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you both answered the feel good, so I'll just go for the gut. I think the thing that I would share with current college students and alumni is that don't let people tell you no. Students have a lot of power, and you oftentimes have a lot more power than we do as staff and faculty. And, I know that sometimes you may feel alone and you may feel super isolated, but always know that there's something called a student handbook, right? And there's something called a mission statement and a strategic plan, and you need to get very familiar with strategy if you're trying to change things on your campus. And know that there's always a faculty member or staff member that has your back. What you have to do is do the work to find out who your allies are and to also know who your opponents are. But don't let people tell you no. Create the organization that you want to create. Establish whatever you want to establish. There are organizations that will support you. There are people that will support you. Whether that's financially or resources. And also to alumni, specifically HBCU alumni, I think there's this like running joke that like we don't give back. Well, I think this message is what I have to HBCUs. We often don't give back because we had a terrible experience when we were there. Right. So I think the thing that I'm asking and inviting us as alumni who have graduated from places that have been homophobic and transphobic is perhaps we could start to bring these issues to our national alumni associations, right? And talking about the issues that we had at these institutions, because oftentimes it's our voice, right, that will help like save LGBTQ folks or other marginalized students and create new pathways. But I still think we have a responsibility, right, if we love our alma maters, right, and we love our institutions. So don't let people tell you no. And like, let's start holding more fire under these institutions to build power.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you all. Thank you. It's always great to share space with you all and just have these great conversations. We've been doing the work, like y'all said, for quite a few years now, and the fruits of our labors clearly is what we're talking about. And hopefully this conversation will put the fire under these institutions to join the bandwagon, to move the needle forward for inclusion on their campus, be it a student center, a student organization, a faculty member that's, doing curriculum or teaching a course, or even just hiring a staff person to just address LGBTQ concerns in some kind of capacity. Just moving the needle forward, that's our goal. So I want to thank you all for your voice in this conversation and your work over the years tirelessly to this cause. Again, this is our first power session. Many more to come, much more to discuss and learn. So we invite you all to stay tuned and join us. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to the great work that's going to come up on your campus. Thank you.